Dive all about explosive atmospheres. Last time we left off talking about the fire triangle and how even flour can create one. So now I'm thinking, okay, what about everyday life? How does this all apply when I'm not working on an oil rig?
That's a great point. You don't have to be in a heavy industry setting to encounter these risks.
Yeah.
We often create mini fire triangles in our own homes and garages without even realizing it.
Okay, that's a little scary.
Yeah.
So what are some examples of how that might happen? Like, how do we accidentally create these fire triangles?
Well, think about some of those flammable liquids we were talking about: gasoline, paint thinner, even nail polish remover.
Really?
Say you're cleaning a paintbrush in the garage. You spill a little bit of that thinner on the floor. If you don't have good ventilation, those vapors can build up, and suddenly you've got a fuel source ready to mix with the oxygen in the air.
And all it takes is a, little spark from a power tool or something like that.
Exactly. Or, those gas cans that we all have for lawnmowers or snow blowers, they're not stored properly. A little leak could lead to a buildup of vapors. And your shed's a tinderbox.
Oh, man. Okay, I am definitely rethinking how I store those things now. So flammable liquids.
Yeah.
What about dust, though? I know we talked about flour. Are there other types of dust in our homes that could be a risk?
Absolutely. Think about your attic or basement. If you've got dust buildup, especially fine dust,
Oh, yeah.
like sawdust from home projects or even just regular house dust, it can create a flammable cloud.
Really?
Yeah, you might not think about, your dusty old boxes as being potential fuel, but in the right conditions, they can become a hazard.
So my cluttered basement, which I've been meaning to clean for like 6 months, could actually be a fire hazard. Now I'm really motivated to get down there. Okay, so we've talked about the dangers. Now, what are some practical steps we can take to reduce these risks? I mean, how can we stay safe in our homes and, just going about our daily lives?
Well, the first thing is just awareness. Just by knowing about the fire triangle and how these elements interact, you're already more mindful of those potential hazards.
So being aware of those flammable liquids and dust buildup.
Exactly, and storing them properly. Ventilation is super important too.
Okay.
When you're working with flammable liquids, make sure you're doing it in a well-ventilated area. Open windows, use fans. If you need to, wear a respirator.
So open the windows, let those fumes dissipate. That makes sense. What about those dust bunnies in the basement? Should I be wearing a mask down there when I'm cleaning?
It's not a bad idea, especially if you've got, a lot of fine dust. A dust mask can protect your lungs, and it also reduces the amount of dust that you're stirring up into the air. And when it comes to cleaning, a damp cloth is better than a dry one because it'll help keep that dust from becoming airborne.
Okay, so awareness, ventilation, and proper cleaning techniques.
Mhm.
What about ignition sources, though? I mean, we can't exactly eliminate all sources of sparks and heat from our homes, can we?
Of course not.
Mm-hmm.
But we can be mindful of them and we can take precautions.
Okay.
So, for example, make sure your electrical outlets and your wiring are in good condition.
That makes sense.
Don't overload circuits. And if you notice flickering lights or any sparking appliances, get those checked by an electrician.
All right, so electrical safety is key. What about other potential ignition sources? We talked about static electricity earlier. How can we prevent, those little shocks from turning into a big problem?
Static electricity is more of a risk in dry environments, so using a humidifier can help increase the moisture in the air and reduce that static buildup.
Oh, okay. Interesting.
And also be mindful of, what you're wearing. Synthetic fabrics are more likely to generate static, so opting for natural fibers like cotton can help.
So it's not just about our homes, it's about what we wear too. Wow, who knew? This is turning into a whole lifestyle change.
Yeah.
But no, seriously, these are all really great practical tips. And it sounds like just by being more aware of our surroundings and taking those, those simple precautions, it can really make a difference.
Absolutely. It's not just about protecting yourself either. It's about protecting your family, your home, your community.
Yeah, it's a shared responsibility. So we've covered flammable liquids, dust, electrical safety. Anything else we should be thinking about when it comes to ignition sources?
Yeah, there's one more often overlooked source that's particularly relevant to certain types of dust, and that's minimum ignition energy.
Minimum ignition energy.
Oh.
Okay, break that down for me.
It's a pretty simple concept, actually. Different substances have different thresholds for how much energy it takes to actually ignite them. So, for example, some materials like methane gas have a very low minimum ignition energy, meaning even a tiny spark can set them off. But other materials, like wood dust, require a much higher energy input to ignite.
So a stray spark that might ignite a gas leak probably wouldn't be enough to set off a pile of sawdust.
Exactly. But here's the catch. Some types of dust, especially fine metallic dust, have incredibly low minimum ignition energies. Even the static discharge from your finger could be enough to trigger an explosion.
Wow, I had no idea. So it's not just about the amount of dust, it's the type of dust too.
You got it. And this is where understanding those safety data sheets that we talked about earlier becomes so important because they provide information about the material's minimum ignition energy, which helps you understand, the level of risk and take the appropriate precautions.
So I'm working with something like metal dust. I need to be extra cautious about static and other potential ignition sources.
Exactly. And you might need to take additional safety measures too, like, wearing anti-static clothing or using specialized equipment that's designed to prevent sparks.
This is really fascinating stuff. It's amazing how much we can learn by understanding just a few basic principles.
And it's amazing how powerful that knowledge can be in preventing accidents.
I know I feel a lot more empowered now to
Mhm.
identify these hazards and address them in my own life. I bet our listeners feel that way too. Before we move on to the last part of our deep dive, I have one more question. We've been talking a lot about preventing these explosions by controlling the elements of the fire triangle, but are there any other factors that can influence the risk of an explosion?
That's a great question. It turns out there's one more crucial factor that we need to discuss, and that's the concept of flammable ranges or explosive limits.
Flammable ranges, what are those?
We'll dive into that in the final part of our deep dive.